Hello, welcome back to the 9th episode of the Surface Explorer Record series, where I'm taking you through a 3-step methodology that I use to build with AI. And I'm coming at this from a development, a software engineering background where I've manually coded, and I use this same process working through the software development lifecycle, the SDLC. And now I've taken this methodology and I've converted it for use with AI. So far, we've gone through the idea phase with building business and product decisions and documentation. We went through the design phase where we did a mock-up of the application that we're building and again came up with some design documents. We went through the architecture phase where we looked at architecture design records and technical design documents. And then the implementation phase or the planning phase where we actually created a plan that we're going to use to implement this application that I'm calling TaskFlow. Last episode, we began building the framework, the structure, the foundation that our application is going to build on, and we went through 2 phases. Today, we're going to continue that, and I'm going to show you different ways to use the same methodology, Surface Explorer Record, in order to build the application. So let's go back to VS Code and Claude Code running in the terminal, and we'll see how Surface Explorer Record can help you build an application using AI. Okay, so here we are in VS Code with Claude Code running in the terminal. Actually, it's not running yet, but I'll start it. And I've pulled up the implementation status file. This is the file that I'm using to keep track of my implementation as I build TaskFlow, this task management system that I'm building through this series. Notice that there are several parts. So far, we have completed part A. Notice there's 1 phase for part A, and we've completed that. There are 4 phases for part B, and we've completed that. So the next thing is we need to decide what do we want Claude Code to do next. I'm just going to give it some instructions. Let me close this out real quick so that you can see everything. Open up the terminal. And I'm just going to tell Claude Code that I want it to read through the implementation plan and the implementation status that we were just looking at and give me some options. Notice this is very important. I'm asking the AI to give options, not just do it, but let me choose what it does. So give me some options for continuing to build with TaskFlow. Now, this brings me to a question that I was asked recently. In the previous episode, when I started building the TaskFlow using Claude Code, following the implementation plan, I did a process where at first I would tell Claude Code to follow the implementation plan, like for part A, and then when it finished, when it came back and said, okay, it's done, then I would say, review what you've done, compare it to the documentation that we have, and find any inconsistencies. And every time it would come back with inconsistencies. At that point, I would then modify either the code or the documentation so that it was consistent. Now, here's what's key. Yes, sometimes the code needed to be modified, but sometimes as you're building, you find that your documentation needs to be modified. So your documentation, your decisions, your technical design documents, your architectural decision records, these are all very important blueprints that you give to Claude so that it can follow along and build what you want it to build. But AI isn't just a strict rule-following engine. It's not deterministic in that way. It's probabilistic. So it's going to make some changes. It's going to make some guesses and assumptions even with the information that you give it. So you may look at it and say, yes, the code needs to change. But you may look at what Claude does and says, you know what? My documentation was not ready yet. I didn't have the right information there. I need to change the documentation. So while the documentation, these technical design documents, the product documents, while these are all very important to help give Claude or your coding AI agent context, don't see them as having to be a perfect set of documents. Instead, see them as that blueprint that may have to change, may have to be adjusted a little as you build because of things that come up that you didn't recognize. So what that can do is it can keep you from getting stuck in planning mode where you have to get this just right. You don't have to have everything just right. You just want enough information there to get started and then let it be a living document to grow as you go. So let's see what Claude recommends our next step for building TaskFlow after we finish part A and part B in episode 8. So first it says just start with phase C1. Option 2 is start with phase C2. Option 3 is start with phase C3. So it's interesting. It gives us some options even with the implementation plan. Now, if you keep going through this, this is one of the things that I wanted to show you. Notice that in option 5, it says that there are still some runtime verifications that are needed from part B. So even though Claude said part B is finished, there's really some things that we couldn't do because I didn't have Docker running. I have Docker running this time, so I think I want to finish these out so that Claude can do some runtime verifications. Now, notice the recommendation is exactly what I just said. It recommends starting with option 5. Let's close out part B completely and let's finish these runtime verifications, and then let's move on to part C. It suggests proceeding with option 1. I don't see why not. Why not start with C1? That makes sense. But I don't want it to start with C1 until after we review these runtime verifications. So I'm going to tell Claude, let's start with option 5 and close out the runtime verifications. I can't spell. Verifications from part B, then stop before continuing. Now, it's very important because if I didn't tell it to stop, it's very likely that Claude would just say, hey, you know what? It just wants to do a recommendation, so I'm just going to keep going. Now, I'm going to tell it specifically to stop at that point, and then I'm going to review what happened, and then we'll decide whether or not to continue. So I'll kick Claude off there with that instruction, and I'll come back in a few minutes when Claude is finished. Okay, welcome back. So I'm still in the middle of that last instruction that I gave to Claude, but I wanted to show you that in this case, Claude found 2 real bugs in the system that it needs to commit. And so it's given me the option, and I wanted to talk about what these options are before we move on. So first it says that it could handle this by creating a branch and a PR and use that feature branch to commit and compose the fixes. Now, normally, especially if you have a production environment or staging environment, this is the way you would do it. Right now, I'm just building a development version. There is no production. There's nothing really to break if I commit to main. So I'm just going to have it commit directly to main. But I wanted you to see that, though, even if you get to this point and Claude asks you a question or whatever AI agent asks you a question and you don't understand it, don't just pick something or don't automatically pick the recommended. If you don't understand, get out, ask it questions, make sure you understand before you do it. In this case, it's perfectly fine for me to commit to main. Later, once I have TaskFlow running in production, I would not commit it to main. I would use a branch plus PR method that Claude recommended, which is the better method overall. It just doesn't make sense in my case. So I'm going to tell Claude to just commit to main, and I'll come back in a few minutes when he's done. Okay, I'm back. Claude has finished doing the runtime verifications for part B now that I have Docker running, and it was able to load up the Postgres database. Not only that, but it found a couple of bugs, and then it checked the CI route with GitHub, make sure everything was worked. You see it was partial there with some type check failures. I'm okay with that at this point, and it's ready to push, but I'm not quite ready to push to GitHub yet. I'm going to let it sit on that commit for a while. But what I want to do next is I want to jump into part C, and part C begins building more of the back end. Now, people have asked me about this series, like, why are you not using Claude code commands or skills or agents or things like that? Well, mainly because I want this series to be as independent of the coding agent as I can. However, I do want to show you that one thing I would recommend you taking advantage of if you're using Claude Code is plan mode. Now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Claude Code use plan mode to implement all of part C, not just part C phase 1, but all of part C. Not necessarily the way I would typically do it, but I just want to show that to you as we go through this process. Now, I know that you can enter plan mode by using a command, but I'm just going to tell it enter plan mode and implement all of part C from the implementation plan. And then I'm going to say, hey, confirm the build with the documentation that's specified in the implementation plan. If you remember right from the last episode, the implementation plan starts with a list of documents that it references, and it has those references within the plan itself. So I'm going to try to push Claude towards checking before it actually builds anything. So let me kick this off. Claude is going to enter plan mode just because I told it to, and it's going to create the plan first based on my implementation plan, and I'm going to stop when it's ready with the plan, and I'll show you what it's found so far. Okay, so Claude is in the middle of building the plan, and it came across a decision that we didn't make. So it surfaced this decision for us, and it says, how should comment, edit, delete work? In other words, once you can see it there, once someone has commented, who is allowed to edit or delete? And this says that only the comment's author can edit or delete it. Admins and owners cannot edit others' comments. Now, for this application, I mean, this is for just demonstration purposes. It doesn't really matter, but for your application, if you have comments, you may want admins to be able to block or delete or edit comments. But for this, it doesn't matter as much, so I'm just going to tell it to go with its recommended. Now we have another one. Now what do we want to do about the audit log? Do we want to just extend an ADR that's already there? Do we want to audit everything? Do we want a strict adherence? And I'm just going to say extend the ADR we already have. And now I'm just going to submit my answers. Claude's going to use those answers now along with the documentation we already had and built to create the plan. So I'll come back when the plan is finished. Okay, I'm back. Claude has finished its plan. It's a very extensive plan, just like we would expect from plan mode. I'm just going to scroll through here, not to try to get you to read all of it, but just to see that it is very detailed, very extensive. He worked through the code that he had already built. He worked through the documentation that I had provided. He asked me questions when he came up with decisions that needed to be made, and then he provided this detailed plan. Now, the reason I wanted to do this is that different AI coding agents are very good at different things. I think Claude Code is very good at planning, and so I use plan mode quite often. So I want you to see that the methodology that I'm describing, the Surface Explore Record, isn't made to work just with one coding agent. It's a methodology that you can change to work with the way that you want to work. The main thing isn't following the 3 steps exactly or using the prompts exactly like I am. The main point is that you are making the decisions instead of letting the AI make decisions. And if you don't know what decision to make, you ask the AI for options, helping you understand strengths and weaknesses, trade-offs, assumptions of each option. That's what's important. So now I'm going to have a Claude Code go ahead and start off this plan. Now this is an entire phase, part C, so it's going to take a while. I'm going to stop the episode here because you've seen everything that's really important to see at this point. You've seen how the Surface Explore Record methodology can work a little bit differently than I showed you last time, but still giving you the ability to make those decisions and guide the AI instead of the AI making silent decisions for you that you don't know about. You've seen also how you can use it within the structure, the infrastructure of your AI coding agent. So if you have an AI coding agent that's very good at design, then you can hand off some of that design work to the AI coding agent, but you still need to make the decisions and give it the decisions that are most important to you. You can decide which ones are important, but don't just let the AI make all the decisions for you, or you won't come up with your app. You'll come up with some generic app that may not be what you want. So all I'm going to do next is once Claude finishes working through part C, then I'm going to do something very similar that I did in episode 8. And I'm just going to have it review the build, compare it to the documentation that I've given it, look for inconsistencies, and then we'll work through each of those inconsistencies and make sure that we get everything fixed, whether it's the code that needs to be fixed or the documentation that needs to be fixed. We don't want anything lagging here. We don't want to come, in the last phase, part I, and suddenly find that our documentation doesn't match our code doesn't match our documentation. So we're documenting as we go, making sure that everything is matching and consistent as we go through there. So I'm going to stop here and just remember, the whole point of this is not to teach you how to plan. The planning is very important, and the planning is necessary if you want to get a good app. And that's the reason that I put together the Surface Explore Record. But you could be like me and just really enjoy architecting and planning and designing, and you can get stuck in this planning mode. But remember that the goal here is to create an app. So use the methodology, keep the goal in mind. Don't always plan until you get a perfect set of documents. Instead, plan until you're ready to build, and then let those documents go with you. I hope that that's the point that I got across well in this episode. And thank you for your feedback and your comments and your emails, whether they're on YouTube or TikTok. I've enjoyed meeting a lot of people that are following along and are using this. And if you have any questions or comments, drop them drop them in the comments here or hit me up on TikTok. And finally, once I finish this and once I finish part C and do the review, I'll push this all up to GitHub. So all of the prompts, all of the code, all of the documentation will be in GitHub if you want to go check out what we actually did. Thanks for joining this episode, and I hope to see you next time.